Okay, wonderful. So today's topic is Adapt or Die, how Atheists United and the secular movement is evolving to meet the times. Christine, I'm going to ask for your help in muting anyone that's not currently muted. Thank you. So this topic is really, really important to me. I think there is a lot of ideas about how to grow a movement, about what a movement is, about the place of different institutions within a movement. But I feel like we sometimes miss the larger idea of what makes them successful and what moves them forward. And for me, I come back to phrases like adapt or die. And the reason I really care about this concept and why I think it's actually central to an atheist or humanist ethic is because if we're truly, truly living to our rational peaks, if we are internalizing the values that should come from a humanist and atheist perspective about the world, we should be challenging status quo bias as hard as any community in the world. We should see things like holy books as absurdities to place your values and build your communities off of. The idea that something written thousands of years ago should be trusted more than new information and science and logic obviously is wrong. So we, as a community, should have a value and a commitment to progress, to innovation, to change. And that's where I think we need to always come back to this idea when analyzing what we're doing with communities and where we're going as a movement. So I'm gonna talk about two main concepts today. Hopefully you all can see my screen well. And that is Atheists United. That's this institution, this organization in Los Angeles that I work for and have been working on for the past 3 years. Maybe some of you in the audience are friends of mine and you've kind of been curious what on earth I've been up to, talking about atheism and atheist community building nonstop for the past 3 years. And then second, we're going to talk about the secular movement. And I'm sure some of you have questions about what I even mean when I say secular movement, and we're going to get into that as well. So first, let's talk about me though, because I haven't had a proper introduction. I know 90% of you know me pretty well, but for those of you that don't, I want to give a quick introduction. And really, I want to introduce myself more and my experience before I came to Atheists United, because I want you to understand why I'm this really weird person that is kind of obsessed with atheist community building. How I got to the point where I would want and take a job as executive director of Atheists United. And that starts with my experience in college, actually, at California Lutheran University. So I attended Cal Lutheran from 2007 to 2011, and I founded their first Secular Student Alliance chapter there. I founded their atheist group on campus. If you remember 2007, 2008, it was Proposition 8 happening here in California. We had a lot of conversations and dialogue about religion's place in government and the power of religion in our politics. And that led me and a group of people to found the first atheist club there. And really, this was a life-changing experience for me. This is where I found my group of friends. I found a community that shared my levels of curiosity. They were comfortable being vulnerable and growing together. I really discovered something magical that I don't think a lot of us get to experience in life, which is a community that just understands you and is growing with you. I wound up becoming the first atheist student body president at California Lutheran University, which helped springboard me into all of this other atheist and humanist activism. I joined the board of the National Secular Student Alliance after college, and I've been on that board for 10 years now. At 8 of those past 10 years, I've served as their president. I teamed up with Paul Schmier in Ventura County. Shout out to Paul if he's watching right now. We founded the Humanist community of Ventura County, which in just 2 years, we went from 1 event a month up to 8 events a month with no funding and almost no other volunteer support. This was my first experimentation with community building off campus. And then in 2014, I moved to Arizona, Phoenix, Arizona, to work for the James Woods for Congress campaign. James Woods was the only open atheist running for federal office in 2014, and we helped him bring attention to basically a long shot race. We got national attention. We went viral a few times. And that kind of inspired the team of us that worked on that to open our own consulting firm, which is Spectrum Experience. We pretty much opened the first humanist consulting firm in the country, as far as we can tell, and specialized in PR and branding and communications for people that shared our values, who wanted to change the world in similar ways as us. And we mostly worked with atheist and humanist communities and organizations. And then in 2015, and again in 2017, after some rough elections, we toured the country, my business partner and I, with our podcast, The Humanist Experience. And while the podcast was fun, and I learned a ton on the podcast, and I got to explore the experiential and the emotional side of humanism a little bit more than the rational side, or the traditional way of thinking about the rational side. What I really gained from that was a better understanding of what atheist and humanist community building looks like around the country. Had the opportunity to speak to about 15 different groups around the country, visited military base atheist groups, I'm trying to remember Tennessee and Minneapolis and New Jersey and Arizona. We spoke to all these different groups around the country, and it gave me a much better sense of where we were as a movement in community building, which all led up to 2019, where I was hired as the first executive director of Atheists United, which has been an absolute privilege. But this is a huge decision for them. Atheists United had never had a full-time staff member before. And why should you spend money on staff? Honestly, we have to ask this question because there's a lot of strategic decisions that go into the resources you've raised as an organization. And I'm going to get into those in a second. But first, we have to go back to 2018. I know this feels like ancient history because we've been in a pandemic for so long, but there was this time called 2018 where a bunch of big things happened in the world. You might remember the Parkland school shooting. That was 2018. Brett Kavanaugh, this asshole I've got on screen, he was appointed to the Supreme Court in 2018. John McCain died. Kanye West got to visit Trump in the White House. The Woolsey fire maybe affected some of you when that came through Ventura County and LA County and displaced hundreds of thousands of people. In 2018, I actually had an awesome opportunity to come through California and speak to Atheists United. This is me speaking to Atheists United, talking about, frankly, a very similar topic is what I'm going to speak to today. And what I found out is Atheists United was in a unique situation that almost no local atheist group in the country was in, is that they had $500,000 in resources. So someone had died and given them $500,000. And the second half of that $500,000 showed up in 2018. And like any good nonprofit trying to figure out what to do, they were considering proposals. And the big proposal they were chasing at the time was investment in a building. The idea was a lot of the struggles they're going through, which I'll describe in a second, could be solved by getting property, by having a home, by being more focused, by giving a place for our programs. But the other option was to hire maybe some young idiot entrepreneurial kid to try to run your organization and maybe raise some money and try some new programming. I'm lucky they chose the second option, but we need to understand what caused them to choose that second option and why a building wouldn't have solved the problems they were in. So we don't have the best data throughout history at Atheists United, but we happen to have really good data of what our attendance was like at our main meetings, our 4 Sunday speaker meetings that you're at right now in 2014 through 2018. And this is how things were going. This is our average attendance for the year. And in 2014, we were doing amazing. At 80 people attending our events, we were probably one of the top 10 largest communities in the country. I think I can say this with confidence. I've visited a lot of these communities. This is extremely rare to have 80 to 100 people regularly attending your meetings. And Atheists United had that at least half of them in 2014. But within a few years, that hadn't just been halved. We lost 61% of our attendance. Now it's complicated, and we can get into the nuance of all of the factors that were happening at the time, but this is the wrong trajectory if you're thinking about how to build a community or fill a building. Another problem they had is their fundraising was going the wrong direction. So I pulled these numbers the other night and got rid of the investment income to just look at fundraising and membership income. And in 2017, we were at $20,000 in membership income, fundraising and membership income, 17,000 of that coming just from our members and their donations on top of their membership. But by the next year, by 2018, that had been halved. We had a 50% drop in our fundraising as an organization. This is massive. This is really hard to recover from. And so faced with this situation, trying to figure out what to do, they looked at staff. And let's look even a little deeper at their expenses. So in 2017, they spent $27,000. Well, they continued to spend that amount of money in 2018. Now remember, they had a ton of money in the bank because a big bequest came in, but they put those in investments. The idea was we'll make money off of those for years until we know exactly what we're spending the money on. But at the time, if we take a snapshot of the organization, we look at their programs and how they were spending money, we spent about a third of our expenses on these meetings, one meeting a month for the membership that we know averaged 31 people at a time. And then another third of the organization's expenses went into a newsletter. I don't mean an email newsletter, I mean a print newsletter. We paid somebody to professionally design and write for a multi-page newsletter that we then mailed physically to our membership, about 161 members at the time. So between these two things, which we didn't have the best metrics on how many people were reading the newsletter, if that led to fundraising or not, well, we know it wasn't leading to a ton of fundraising because these two together is almost double what we had in fundraising that year. A third and almost double the amount of income we had from fundraising was going to these two programs that served under 160 people and more likely about 30 to 40. We're becoming a smaller and smaller and more tight-knit community of a very specific group of people, and the trajectory is not good. And then the brand, we also had a larger problem. At the time, right before I took the job, I actually went and spoke to as many people about the organization as I could. I wanted to get a sense of what people thought of it outside of Atheists United, people who were formerly members and board members of the organization, former speakers, former other local community members who had outside perspectives on it. And the sense was we were cliquey, we were white, we were older. There's an unprofessionalism at times, definitely void of youth. And in some ways, people even described us as stale. I had a few people advise me not to take the job with the belief that this community can't change. Now, I know that's not true, and I'm going to explain why that's not true in a few seconds here, but this isn't actually an uncommon problem. And we're going to speak to this a little bit later, but most atheist and humanist communities, most religious communities, which I'm going to describe us in for the larger sociological context here, are actually struggling with this concept right now. Where are the young people and why aren't they joining our communities? Where is the new programming and vigor? And why is there this disconnect seemingly between the people who are left in the community and the future members you want in the community? And this is what we were going to work on. But I want to talk really quickly about why this killed me, because I knew Atheists United. When I went to California Lutheran University, 2007 and 2011, the very first person I ever met in the larger secular movement was Bobby Kirkhart of Atheists United. And now Bobby, if you don't know, had been a local, national, and international leader for humanism. Between her and Michael Khalili, who I'd known in the 10 years I kind of knew Southern California organizing, they had some of the most innovative programs, some of the largest community organizing probably in the country. I mean, at its peak, when Bobby was leading the organization, we had 400 members. The Atheists United brand used to be attached to innovation. It used to be attached to leading the secular movement. And we were struggling to hold together a community at this point. This is why, in some ways, some people described it as an existential issue. I don't know if it was quite that bad. When you have $500,000 in the bank, you've got a lot of time to figure out what's next. But they decided to hire me, and I got to ask a lot of good questions about how do we work on this institution, this organization that's been around since 1982. So at the time, it was 36 years old. But the very thing that made it special, the fact that it had survived 36 years in existence, is possibly the thing that was choking it to death. It started to see itself as an institution. It became hard to change things because it had been doing the same things for years on end for the same people over and over again. And this gets us back to the larger concept of why we have to adapt or die. We have to start looking at every single one of our organizations as startups, because we're not a movement that is 2,000 years old and we know 50 years from now we're going to have members that love everything we're doing. We are in a communication revolution like no other time in world history, right? We have changing demographics like never before in America, religiously, ethnically, educationally. We have income inequality and climate change problems like never before. We cannot look at the past 30 years as the solution to the next 30 years. So let's talk about the goals we set to try to change that. So first, we focused on rebuilding our relationships. Luckily, this is the easiest thing to do. You can go out and network your butt off if you're just nice and looking to help people, not just get something from them. We had sit-down meetings with other local organizations in our city, like Sunday Assembly and Center for Inquiry. We met up with Inland Empire Atheists, Agnostics, and Humanists, Humanist Association of Orange County, Santa Clarita Atheists and Freethinkers. We really got down at the grassroots level and started meeting people where they were. We started asking them what their needs were. We started telling them that we're there for them. And we started thinking about this as a movement work rather than just Atheists United work. Second, we had to do some internal reflection. We had to focus on our own operations and branding. This is where we invested in a donor management software, member management software, new file management systems, new volunteer and communication platforms, new budgeting and bookkeeping expectations. And I'd love to say that this was all easy and everyone was excited to do it, but I'll be frank, we had board members that fought a lot of these changes, that wanted us to continue doing what we had been doing for years. And I suspect almost every religious community or atheist community or humanist community trying to do similar changes is having the same discussions. We focused on new programs. We knew we needed new fundraising. We knew we needed new people. We knew we needed new energy. And really, we decided, well, we have to try some new things. We have to go out there and build the programs that meet people's needs, that matches their identities, that touches them in ways that they're looking for. Sounds creepier than it meant to be. And then finally, if we're successful at all of those and we put some real concentrated time and attention into it, can we increase fundraising? Now, if you're part of an organization that doesn't have staff, that doesn't have big software, that doesn't have a lot of costs associated with your programming, you might be confused why I'm so obsessed with this fundraising point and these operation points and why we need to be launching all of these new things. But again, this is institutional thinking. You're only thinking about your organization as it is and not as it could be. And I think we really have to start envisioning what we could be 10 years from now if we had resources, what we could do if we could institutionalize some of our systems and build things up in ways where we could manage 50 volunteers rather than 5 volunteers. And the second we hired staff, the second we committed almost $50,000 in expenses a year to this, we had no choice but to do this. We were no longer a $27,000 a year organization, little nonprofit in Los Angeles. For us to be sustainable now with programs and staff, we have to raise over $100,000 a year. So that's the goal now. So let's see how we did. So fast forward to 2021, we're now in late September, and I'm going to give you a quick rundown on a few of the things we've been doing and how they've been going. For those of you that are program leaders for other communities around the country, I hope some of these are inspiration to you. And if we want to get into the nitty-gritty of some of these, let's bring them up in the Q&A. This photo is of our food distribution. I want to say over half the people in this photo were not part of actually all but 4 of the people in that photo were new as of a year and a half ago. They'd never participated in anything with Atheists United before. This is very exciting what we've been able to pull off in the past 3 years. First, let's talk programming. We went on a programming bonanza. This is currently a list of Atheists United's programs, and everything in blue has been created or radically upgraded in the past 3 years. This is unbelievable when I actually stopped and created this chart for this meeting. We're still trying to process how big we've become as an organization, but with staff and with a larger volunteer base, this is completely possible. And I want other communities to start thinking about what they could accomplish if they started to grow the institutional side of their organization. Atheist Adventures is a new programming we're launching this year, where we're doing a camping trip in Death Valley to look at the stars and have a star talk on a sand dune on a moonless night in one of the best dark sky spots in the world. Atheist Give is where we do fundraising for other causes locally. In the past, we've raised for Black Skeptics Los Angeles COVID Relief Fund, for wildfire relief, and we're looking for more charities constantly to support. Atheist Volunteer, this is where we are pushing people into more and more volunteer programs, which ultimately helped kick off our food distribution, which is now its own program. Our advocacy network is a new partnership we have with American Atheists, where we're trying to better organize statewide advocacy for atheists, agnostics, humanists, and other non-religious identities across the state. Chapter and affiliate program, we have really ramped up our relationship to some of our chapters and affiliates and are building out more resources for them, including insurance and bank keeping and bookkeeping for some of our chapters, and more leadership development for some of our affiliates. Evolve Youth Group, we had our first event yesterday. This is a high school age youth group that is focused on humanist ethics and curiosity. This, as far as I can tell, is one of the first humanist youth groups in the country. Food distributions, as I've mentioned, we give out over 3,000 pounds of food a month in partnership with the LA Food Bank, and have raised thousands of dollars, including grant money, off of this program that we never would have had otherwise. Our meetup network, which I'm not mentioning, we've actually radically expanded. We have added many more groups locally, especially with the pandemic. We've been able to kind of think more about virtual programming for some of those. And then a few that I'm especially proud of is bringing in recovering from religion and smart recovery. So when thinking about the needs of your community, we need to actually start thinking about people as atheists and not just their atheism, right? A lot of these atheist communities, we get very caught up in the philosophical debate between religion, between theism and non-theism. But in reality, when we build community, you have to meet the needs of the people in that group. You have to meet the atheists and what they're dealing with. What that means is, if you're talking to a young person, you can't ignore the issue of student loan debt. If you're talking to a Black community member, you can't ignore police violence, right? If you're talking to, I don't even know, like I could go for days about like the needs of different sub-communities within our community, but we have people with religious trauma in our community that are not being directly addressed until we have programs like Recovering from Religion. I think it's critical that every community in the country consider how to include more programming that meets that need. Smart Recovery, for instance, is a drug and alcohol recovery program that is based on science, that is secular. It is welcoming to all people, unlike AA and NA, which have religious roots and ask you to believe in a higher power and are passive and are not updating based on new scientific research. These are really, really critical programming if we're thinking about meeting the whole human experience in our community groups. And then we have a choir, which is looking for a bass right now if you sing. Okay, let's talk fundraising. So our fundraising actually has been quite good. I actually had been underrepresenting this in some past presentations, but I finally looked. And when you remove our investment income and you look at actual fundraising for the past few years, we've actually been on a steady trajectory. Now, losing money's easy, making money's hard. So going from 20,000 to 10,000 in 2017 to 2018, that could be a donor or two, that could be some lost connections. That's actually really simple. But regaining the trust of those people, finding new members and donors, if everyone could please mute themselves, that would be really helpful. That takes a lot of work, and we've been doing the slow, steady way. And even during a pandemic, we've been succeeding. I'm going to get into that in a second. So far this year, January through September, we're already up to 20,000. We got a PPP loan, which will become an official grant once it's forgiven in the next few days, hopefully, which will bring this number up to almost 30,000. And if we can raise another $10,000 by the end of the year, we will have 4 times the fundraising income of this organization in just 3 years. We are doing this right. We are succeeding as an organization right now. Now we have a long ways to go, and I'll be the first one to tell you that. We can get into the details of it. But I just want to challenge anybody who says we're not doing this right, who doesn't understand how fundraising works in nonprofits. It is a slog. If it was easy, everyone would be doing it. And we're taking the slow, steady approach. And what that means is the organization we used to have basically survived off of $830 a month. I'm averaging monthly expenses and what it takes to run the organization. But our new organization, with all of the programs I laid out, with a staff to professionally manage that, to manage communications, to keep the operations side of the organization, the new Atheists United, the 2021, 2022 Atheists United, the one that is night and day, a completely different organization from 2018, we now need to get up to $10,000 a month to make this possible. This is the goal I'm setting forward to you all on what it takes for one community to have one staff member and have the level of programming we're having. Now, I think we're doing amazing work given the program and the programs we have, and I think there's tons of room for growth here. But I just want everyone to have real expectations about what it takes to do this. This is the new goal. If you gave $1,000 a year in the past, we need you to start thinking about giving $5,000 or $10,000 if you believe in what we're doing in this institution. And how we're going to do that? Here's 4 main ways we're going to do it. First is donations. This is obvious. Donors need to increase their donations, and we need to find new donors for the organization. One of the things we've thrived at over the past 3 years is Facebook fundraising. We've been putting more and more time and effort into Facebook fundraising. We started with a very large following. Most groups don't have this. We have over 15,000 followers on our Facebook page, but we have been consistently asking for money on that Facebook page, and that has brought in a lot of new donors and fundraising. Second is membership. We decided to invest in cleaning up our membership system. We created new membership levels. We built out a new membership database. But I also want to be real with you. We could take the membership we currently have, we could times it by 4, and we still would barely be getting up to 20% of the income we need to make this organization sustainable. This is important. Everyone needs to increase their membership if they can, but this is not actually how we're going to sustain this organization at the size we need. The second is program grants. Now, grants are really hard in the atheist space. Maybe you've worked in other nonprofits before. If you're at the American Red Cross or you've worked for some hunger organization, grants all over the place, and you can apply for them, you'll get some, you won't get others. When you have the word atheist in your name, there are almost no grant organizations that specifically work towards non-theism in society or atheist communities or atheist activism. There's a few, I won't say there's none, but there's very few, and there's not a ton of money there. But what there are a lot of program grants for is hunger in society, like I just mentioned. So suddenly our food distribution program can apply for grants across the country. Smart recovery programs have grant money available to them. If you're looking for new ways to raise money for your organization, you have to start thinking about how your programs, things that serve people, serve society. And there are grants out there for that. But if you're just asking for atheism, we're still maybe 50 years away from lots of grants in that space. And then finally, the big one is we need more bequests. If we are not in your will yet, I really, really, really need you to consider it. We have language on our website for that. I have more materials that will be going out over the next year here, but people need to make a lifelong commitment to our community, right? If I was a church leader right now, I'd be asking you to tithe. I'd be talking about 5 or 10% of your income. And if I said that in front of an atheist community, you would all cringe and run for the hills, right? Even the word tithing probably triggers some of us. I told my girlfriend I might jokingly ask for tithing money at this call, and she's like, I won't attend that. I don't want to be a part of that. Like, it's really, really hard because a lot of us have religious trauma and baggage, and we think it's problematic how these churches have lied to a lot of people about where the money went. The idea that communities can run without money is also magical thinking. We are a nonprofit organization. We are trying to serve groups of people, and we have to have money to do that. So I need you all to think about that. I need you to think about how to help with fundraising if you're not a funder in this case. And then another thing that I didn't put on here, but has been really helpful for us, we also have been getting more and more event attendance money. We've been, with new programs, we've been able to ask for non-member tickets, and we've been able to basically create lower rates for members or free for members, and outsiders have been giving us $10, $20, $50 donations that we wouldn't have had unless we asked. Now, okay, so Atheists United, it's doing really well. Our programs are looking good. Our fundraising is on the way up. We still have a long ways to go. We have built out a volunteer network. And some of the things I didn't mention is we have brought in new leadership. We are diversifying the base of members we have. Almost half of our current membership was not members in 2018. I wish I could tell you with more specificity, but we don't have good data tracking over time of our members, so I can't go look at members in 2015. With our new system, we'll be able to see stuff like that in the future. But we know almost half of our members are new just because of the communication we've been doing. We know bringing new leaders into the organization has brought new friends with them to the organization. If you have people who have been leading your organization for 25, 30 years, pick their brains, but bring in new leaders. People have to let go and let new ideas and create new space for people to thrive. Atheists United is going through that right now. We have brought in some amazing new leaders. You should check out our board page on our website and get to know them if you've never met them before. But they've led to some of the new ideas. They've put the time and effort into improving our organization. Well, let's talk a little bit about the movement. So that's how Atheists United is adapting so that we don't die, so we don't keep going down the trajectory we were looking at from 2017 to 2018. But what about the secular movement? What is this big thing and where is it going? Well, first we have to define it. And the secular movement has a few different definitions based on where you go. Wikipedia is the one I kept actually coming back to. I think somebody who wrote that probably thought the hardest about it, but it's a social and political movement of people who identify as generally non-theistic or coming together for shared identity, cause, and value. What we're seeing, though, is different structures get built out of this. And I don't see this separation described very often by others, and I want to talk about it real quick. And that's the difference between a political movement and a community movement. I spoke about this recently to another group, and I've had some time to think about it ever since. And I'm really hooked on this idea that we actually need to talk about them differently. And the reason for that is because they have different goals if they're going to be successful. Political movements have to be broad-based. You want as many people as possible if you want to have a successful political campaign, political movement, right? You need to build this coalition of people. You want it to be big and bold and powerful. But what you lose is the focus, right? It has to have less things that it focuses on because it's gotten so big that there's only a few things we can all agree on. Now, in religious movements, which sociologically we would fit under, so that's why I'm using this language here. I realize it's frustrating to a lot of you that I called this a religious movement, but just put your sociology hat on for a second. If we think about our secular political movement, we've been doing a ton of work on this the past years, which I'll get to in a second. But really, you see debates all the time about what we should focus on. And the one or two things we always come back to is separation of church and state, which is kind of the foundation of what is needed for equity for atheists and other non-theistic identities in our society, right? It is our protection from the one group that can hurt us more than any group, which is the government. And we've seen terrible examples throughout world history when governments and religions mix. So we have to have freedom from religion as atheists, humanists, and other secularists in society. And secular government will provide equity for other religious identities as well. But this is existential for us. Like, we have to protect the separation of church and state. And then beyond that, it starts to get a little mushier. We talk about reason. There's new research out by American Atheists that shows that actually we have a ton of political alignment on a lot of issues, maybe even more political alignment than the religious right does on their issues when it comes to issues like abortion access, gay rights, maybe even environmentalism. But this is hard, right? This is really, really hard work because it's broad-based. Political movement building is always going to be the trickier of the two, arguably. Then the other is community movements. Now, community building, if you want to build a successful community, you can't be all things to all people because you'll become meaningless. Your programs will have no real context. How will you find friends and want to keep coming back to it if the people there aren't actually like you? So community movements are often focused. They need to actually be more focused on things that people have shared affinity and shared values and shared language and shared ritual around. And so this is where these two contrast at times, right? If you build a Jewish humanist community, it's not very inviting necessarily to ex-Mormons who don't understand the rituals and language. This is why humanists and atheists have clashed, because the atheist movement has generally been more of a political movement traditionally. But yeah, we have a lot of questions about how to make this work, and I'm going to dive into them here in a sec. Yeah, okay. Atheists United, though, is the tricky example where we're trying to balance the two. And this is actually part of our failure and part of our success. Half of our organization, half of our mission is committed to an issue like separation of church and state and trying to change the world. And the other half of our mission is focused on building thriving atheist communities. And I feel like this is where we get pulled apart because we're sometimes trying to be everything to all atheists. And on the other end, we're trying to be really successful and powerful to a group of people that have shared ritual identity affinity. So let's talk about what makes a successful political movement. I have a friend who studies the religious right for a living. She founded an institute on male supremacy recently. She's one of the best scholars I've ever met. And I once had her give me 4 hours of her time to break down the research she had done on the religious right. And one of the things she kept coming back to was the 4 biggest ideas that the religious right hooked itself on for how to make a successful movement. So the first is movement, second is members, third is media, and the fourth is money. What I mean by movement is going to be your institutions. This is going to be your organization. So in the atheist movement, this would be your Freedom from Religion Foundation, Secular Coalition for America, American Atheists, Center for Inquiry, Camp Quest, Secular Student Alliance, right? These national institutions, sometimes there's local ones. And in the religious right, you have, you've got everything from think tanks to like focus on the family, right? Like these institutions, these movement-built organizations that kind of keep things together and keep people working together. So that would be the grass tops. These are the people who are your lobbyists, staff. These are the organizational structures of a movement. But then there's the members. These are the tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of people that make up your movement. This is usually what we call grassroots. This is where all the people are. These are the people you would mobilize if you're going to have a march or do a letter writing campaign, a call campaign. If you're going to convince the governor to do something, you want lots and lots of people. More successful when you also have a lobbyist, but these two things should work together. Third is media. Media kind of functions a little bit outside of these two, but obviously works together with them. This is where you have people making professional content that is designed to influence, designed to persuade, designed to brand. Scientology, for instance, puts most of their money into media. They don't have a huge membership base necessarily, but their media wing is massive. They've probably overinvested there compared to other things, but they seem to be doing just fine with money and movement. But yeah, think about the religious right and all of the radio stations they have, the documentaries they're making, the movies they're making, the stars they're working with, the press releases they put out, the arcs they're building, and then the debates they're hosting with Bill Nye, right? Like media has become a core part of their political movement building. And then money. Money is really just the fuel for all of this to be sustainable. You really can't build the institutional side, the media side, and keep large, arguably millions of people organized without money. You have to invest money somewhere. Now, if we look at the atheist movement for a second, for the past 30 years, we've been slowly but steadily progressing at all of these. The amount of national organizations we have has been improving. It has been diversifying, and they've been getting better and better. If you look at the staff that are hired at these organizations, they've been coming now with more and more and more experience. 15 years ago, we could barely get staff members other than what were current volunteers in our movement. And some of our national organizations right now are picking off leaders from the tops of other movements, like the feminist movement and the LGBT movement. We're really doing a good job here, but there's so much more work to be done. And part of why you see a lot of burnout is because people think this should be happening quicker. They're upset that it's still taking so long and that there's such slow progress. But movements are really, really slow moving trains. Membership, this one's been the rockiest for us. So if we were to go back in history and look at the different spikes of the secular movement, one of the best movements, maybe the worst for America, but the best moments in community building and movement building politically for atheists was post 9/11. You'll remember we had George Bush in the White House, and the religious right was finally getting their legs under them in halls of power. We had terrorists attack the United States with religious inspiration and identity. And we had the rise of the internet, where atheists and humanists could finally find each other for the first time. You know, you didn't have to go to your library and look up atheism and then not tell your parents and then not tell your spouse. Like, you now can go find an atheist forum in a community and connect with other people. But our membership has also been struggling, I think, because it hasn't been adapting. We need to meet the needs of new people. We know today that 1 in 3 young people do not identify as religious, and yet we're not capturing them in community. Something's broken here on the membership side. Media is probably the least developed of the 3 here for our political movement. We do not have large media institutions. Of the national organizations we have, very few of them invest in large campaigns. FFRF is probably the best example right now, doing TV commercials, but it mostly just helps their membership at the moment, which leads to more lawyers, which helps the movement. And then money. This is maybe the biggest problem we have right now. We are not funding our movement enough. We have to fund institutions. We have to invest like our life depends on it. Now, I realize we aren't always the first existential cause when thinking about the problems in the world, but separation of church and state, but secular community building, secular government are an intersectional social justice issue that is needed for all other social justice issues to work. Okay, let's move on for a second. I'm almost done and we're getting really close. And then community, what are the things you need to have a successful community movement? Well, you need to be present, which means you need to literally be active. We need to get groups off the ground. Doesn't mean you're always going to be successful, but you need to exist. The fact that we have only 3 groups with staff in Los Angeles, arguably 5 groups in all of LA, is sad to me. There's probably 1 million atheists in a city this large, and yet we still only have like 3 really active groups for them. We need more. We need more. We need to be pumping these out. And yes, half of them, 60% of them are going to fail. I don't know. But we have to try to be present. We have to convert more volunteers to start groups. We need to localize those groups. We need to be present. Second is we need to be supportive. Again, I've mentioned this earlier, and I'm going to come back to it again and again. We have to find the needs of the people in the community and address those. When we became an institution that cared only about our speaker meetings and our newsletter, we had decided that we only cared about the needs of the 30 people that were coming just to our community. We weren't being supportive of the other 120 members that we had that probably wanted other programming. When Atheists United in 2018 was thinking about how to get young people, you need to think about what is a way to be supportive of young people. We need to be thinking about what they're going through in their life. They're often moving into new cities and don't have friends, families, and professional networks. They're looking for dating networks. They're looking for places to find jobs. They're looking for mentors, right? Like, you have to be thinking about how we can help other people in our community, not just serve them, not just offer programming that you think you like. Relevant means we need to adapt to the times. We can't ignore issues like Black Lives Matter, like climate change, like trans justice. These are here and they're not going anywhere. These are the issues of the next 30 years. We need to talk about them. We need to take stances on them, or we need to die. Really, like, if you can't stay relevant, you're going to stay myopic as a community. And then we have to stay connected. And this kind of brings us back to how we connect to a political movement. We found that some organizations have decided to create their own models. They've tried their own rituals, and then they struggle to work with others. Now, I appreciate that you are testing new models, new language. You started a new group in a new area and you want to go at it yourself. Okay, whatever, do your thing. But we have this larger intersectional movement. We have abortion access being restricted. We have a Supreme Court that might overturn gay rights. We have prayer being put back into our schools. You know, evolution could be back on the cutting. This is nuts, right? That we are talking about these issues in 2022 and beyond, but we are, and we have to have political power to fight those, which means we have to stay connected and work together as communities. So while your community needs to focus on its people and serve them really well, you can't forget that there's still a larger community that you only share maybe 20% of things with, not 80% of things with, but that 20% is still important for political reasons. Okay, I've said too much. Q&A will be where we really dig into everything. That was very broad brush at times, but I really appreciate your time. And I hope this was educational and informational for you. Christine, I was thinking maybe you manage the Q&A if you're comfortable with that.
Yeah, we have a couple of, I'm looking at some of the questions in the chat. Diane Hart had a question about forming clubs on college and high school campuses. She wants to know more about that. And I'm sure that you can speak a lot on that, having been the president of, or the board chair of Secular Student Alliance.
Yeah, so the Secular Student Alliance is in a really precarious spot right now because we're trying to restart campus organizing after a pandemic that wiped out pretty much a year of school. We now have people who were juniors in high school starting freshman year of college who still mentally feel like juniors. We are going through a lot right now of change on college campuses, but organizations like Secular Student Alliance and Camp Quest are where I would encourage you to put time and effort if you're looking for places to give donations. Local organizations need to find ways to support and connect with groups like this. I had really good relationships built up with the USC group, UCLA group. Cal Lutheran was trying to restart their secular student group at the time. Pandemic wiped all that out, and I'm going to have to start from scratch again. But local communities don't have to shove themselves in the space of students, right? Students have their own campus. They think we're kind of weird organizing our programs for adults, but they need money, they need support, they need to know that there's larger programs for them out in the world. The reason I started the Humanist community of Ventura County is because Paul Schmier gave $50 a month to my Secular Student Alliance group, literally, because he went out of his way to find us and say, I'm going to support you. No return on investment. You don't owe me anything. I built a connection with him. And the second I left campus, he was the first call I made when I decided I was interested in founding a community. It was that simple. That type of relationship building is completely possible and we all can do it. And it doesn't even take money all of the time, though that does help.
There was also some curiosity about the college that you attended, Cal Lutheran, and because it is, considered a private religious school. So I think your story is kind of interesting and worth sharing. Yeah,
Cal Lutheran isn't probably as religious as you think it is. It's got Lutheran in the name, so people think it's going to be like a Pepperdine or Liberty University, but it's a very pluralistic campus. So I remember when I toured the campus, I've been an atheist since first grade or as long as I can remember. And I grilled the tour guide, how religious is this? We were in the chapel at the time at the end of the tour. And I was, come on, how comfortable is an atheist going to be on this campus? And they kept coming back to this idea. It can be as secular as you want it to be or as religious as you want to be on this campus. And I found that most of the dialogue around religion on campus was in the educational realm. They were really pushing like world religion as a study, essentially, and that faith and reason is core to their mission. And while the word faith, I know, doesn't mean much to most of us, reason sure as heck does. And the fact that they prioritize that to the level where it could even critique and be a part of how they look at faith. I honestly found it a super comfortable and inviting environment. And I just heard news recently that the Secular Student Alliance is restarting at Cal Lutheran. It had been dead for a few years. So hopefully I'll have some exciting news on how we can get that group working with us again.
All right, cool. And let's see, well, we had a question come in from Louis. I'll read it because it's kind of a long question. Atheists United LA was founded when the population of Southern California was more homogeneous. It is now far more diverse. And what is AU doing to reach out to this diversity? Then the other part of the question is AU going to do something to increase the cultural competency of its veteran membership and the organization generally?
Yes, and like this is, I think, one of the critical questions we have to ask as we look at the future, and one of the toughest. So one of the simplest things I've found for bringing in new people and addressing cultural competency with expediency is to change leadership. It's as simple as that, right? Like we've been able to talk to and engage younger people by simply having me as executive director. It has radically changed the conversations we've had when young people come in the door and they see other people like them. The language we're using is very similar. The platforms we're using to communicate is very similar. And honestly, I truly believe that is one of the fastest ways we could do that with Atheists United. We need to continue to put new people into leadership. We need to, and I know that it's a deeper question than this, and it's not about putting people in place, but no, let me say it this way. We need to deplatform whiteness and maleness as the go-to standard concept of what atheist community is. If you look at how we have talked about atheism and who we have centered as our figures and who we have popularized, it is a homogenous, white, often male group of people. And we are lacking sometimes the language and competency to speak to the communities that have always had thriving atheist members, but are not active in our community. So this is an ongoing project. The new programs was my focus for the first 3 years. And now I think we need to have more complicated questions about direct competency arguments, because I think there is a good critique there where some of our veteran membership, as you called it, are resistant or struggling to engage these conversations the way I think most of the membership is excited to.
Okay, and Bobby Kirkhart has a question about young people, and she said that we have a history of reaching out to high school and college age students, and she said that this is limited, or she contends that this is limited in value unless these kids can see their future with us in young families. In this area, we've had very little success and interest. Do we have plans in this area?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, this kind of, there's always a bit of a chicken and an egg problem when you have talking about new groups of people. Atheists United, I've actually looked back at a lot of our speaker programs for the past 10 years on our YouTube, which I encourage you all to do. And we have a lot of speakers who've talked about a lot of these issues, how to bring in young people, how to bring in Black members, how to bring in Latino members. Like we've had speakers on these topics. But the messages they're presenting aren't internalized and institutionalized that often, I find. We need to talk about and address the needs of those communities directly. We can't just say we want young people. We have to talk about the issues and world that they live in, which means we need to speak on different platforms. You know, like one of the first things I did when I joined Atheists United was I relaunched our Instagram, which had been dead for 4 years, our TikTok, our Twitter, which had been dead for a few years, and our YouTube, which had been inactive for a few years. And immediately we started seeing activity again. We started to notice that people in their 20s and 30s and 40s were paying attention to us that weren't before, because we just literally weren't active there. But yeah, my personal idea is we need to make it a part of our strategic planning. We need to prioritize not just having more meetups, but having meetups that directly meet the needs of those groups of people. So that includes a parenting group. The youth group is our most recent intentional attempt at that. We had a high schooler at Hollywood High who started working with us and was interested in a youth group. And for about 5 months, I've been meeting one-on-one with her to design this program. And we are finally launching a high school age youth group. And if we stick to that program, if we keep investing in it, and if we keep platforming people like the student that is leading that, in a few years from now, we will have tons of high school students that know who Atheists United is, might be interested in some of our events. I've been thinking equally about college students. We have a winter solstice event we're planning right now, and I'm planning to reach out to the USC student chapter and giving them all free tickets to our winter solstice party. Sometimes we tell them that we exist, but we need to go a little bit further and actually make it so simple and so inviting for them to participate that it's kind of a why not. I think that's how we get there. There's almost incentives we need to put in place to focus on these areas. And we're slowly talking about that in some areas, but I want to be more intentional.
And along the same lines as youth, Diane Hart also asked the question. She said, we used to support a 21 to 35-ish group. And what about reviving that? And I'm assuming she's referring to Generation Atheists. Yeah, Generation Atheists.
So Michael Khalili and Yari, these were some of the leaders at the time that really helped make this group thriving, and honestly was really energizing Atheists United in the kind of 2013 to 2014 era. I don't know the exact dates, but let's say around 2011, 2015. And this was an amazing group. They did mostly bar meetups. They do beach volleyball. They would have all types of hangouts and meetups, but like it was very specifically designed for that age group, right? Like it wasn't meant to be uninviting to other groups, but it kind of is sometimes when you have affinity groups that focus on the needs of some groups. It's intentionally segregated for the needs of that community. And as of right now, that brand is probably, I wouldn't say dead, but most of the people that were members of that group are now having kids and in their 40s. I've been working with a former student at USC, and we launched a subgroup called Curiosity Collective, which is designed for 20 to 35-year-olds. And we had 5 months of meetings right before the pandemic hit. It was like we just were getting energy, and we had about 8 to 10 really active people, most of them former students from USC. And then the pandemic hit. We made it about 4 months of online meetings before everyone kind of got tired of it. So hoping to relaunch that in the next 6 months, but fundraising is my big passion right now. We need to sustain all these programs we built, and we'll get back to putting some new ones in, and especially if we have more volunteers. But as of now, it's kind of we've built up the institution. Now we have to build up the resources so that we can keep building the institution.
Mm-hmm. I don't see any other questions in the chat. And I don't know if someone else would like to ask a question. Go ahead and put it in the chat. Otherwise, that might be all the questions that we have, Evan.
Yeah, and I really I'm curious what people's thoughts are about where we're heading as a movement, because really, I think there's a lot of people that are getting in the way of that at times. Our own membership, not membership at large, like 50% of it, but we have people in our membership, people who have been in our leadership in the past, who don't think that we should be using a startup model, who thinks atheism is more important than atheists, and kind of are confused or frustrated when we start to talk about social justice issues, even though 80 to 90% of our members are begging us to talk about those issues. So I'd love to just have a quick conversation at it, because I don't see a future in which we can go back to just atheism unless we're going to be a media organization that just debates theists. But is Atheists United going through a big split and revolution right now? And it will inspire 3 other groups that are more focused for maybe people who don't want to talk about abortion access or Black Lives Matter, because we're very committed to that direction right now. Yeah, I'll say that.
Yeah, we have a couple more questions that came in while you were talking. Jolie has a question regarding, there was an article in the LA Times online section that interviewed you. And she wants to know how many members from that recent article. I'm assuming that's what she's referring to. And I think what she means is how many members did we get? Is that what you mean, Jolie? Yeah, she says yes.
Yeah, so media is a funny thing. So I know I mentioned it in the political movement building as kind of one of the tools you use for movement building, but it's a tool you can use for community building. Like, we need to think of media as a tool, not an ends. If media become an ends, we're a media organization. We're not a media organization. We're a community organization and an advocacy organization. And as a tool, it is extremely useful if you can leverage it. But if it was easy, everyone would be doing it, right? This is why people hire professionals and why going viral is this enigma to most people in organizations. It's not a plug and play process. So, but when you do get good media, it is very, very successful. So we recently were profiled in the Los Angeles Times in their newsletter section. We had, I want to say, about 15 members come through in the first 48 hours to maybe that extended into the third day. We saw basically a 10% bump in our membership from just a positive piece in the LA Times, and is definitely something we want to try to recreate more in the future.
Then we have a question from Tracy Glenn. She said that she's interested in how much we emphasize recruiting or pushing atheism, or just being there for those who initiate their approach to AU and subgroups. So yeah, she wants to know how, yeah.
This is critical. And this gets to the brand of Atheists United. And I think there's a misconception about the brand that I don't know where it started. I don't actually think it probably started in Atheists United, because when you talk to most of the leaders and founders of the past 30 years, they talk about Atheists United as in this tradition of positive atheism. Some people have described it in their humanist tradition. Like, it has always been connected to a set of values in their mind, and it has always been intentional on meeting the needs of a community. But for a lot of people, even some of our members, the idea that Atheists United exists for anything other than atheism is confusing and frustrating to them. They always get back to this, like, we are an atheism organization. And I wonder if it's our name that throws them at times. They get caught on the word atheist and they miss the united part and like what on earth we would unite for. And really, we need to think about it as a group of atheists who have united, not a united group for atheism. And while atheism is core to who we are, because you can't understand what an atheist is without it, we have to look at atheists as full human beings and all of the values and issues that come with them. And the second we do that better, the second we communicate our values more than our identity, or attach our values to our identity, I think we speak to much larger audiences, and I think we speak much more effectively to those audiences. And that's what we've been trying to do. So you'll notice our social media, one of the biggest changes we made when I took over was I shut down most of the memes we were posting. We usually would have a lot of confrontational religious memes on our Facebook page, and now we post about current events, and we comment and engage with the issues of our time, because that's what our members are doing, and that's what atheists do. Atheism cares about beating religion and theism in the debate halls, but we're not a debate organization. We're a community organization. We're an advocacy organization. If you want a debate organization, follow a podcast.
So here's a relevant question, kind of along the same lines from JB Ariola. He's in Utah, and he said, as a dad of 3 in rural Utah, we don't have access to pretty much anything with the pandemic. Many things lean online. What is there for us folks?
Yeah, I'm going to answer a bigger question first and then try to answer that one. So when I talked about community building earlier, I mentioned how we have to stay relevant and we have to stay present. That means very different things in very different parts of the country. So I give a different talk about millennial atheism, and I talk about this growing spectrum of atheist identity in America today, because you can be a young atheist in Los Angeles who goes to UCLA and is active in the like student organizing, environmental justice, reproductive justice, and you don't understand why people talk about this thing called atheism all the time. It's just, you're an atheist and your friends are atheists and your parents are atheists. And why would we be talking about atheism all the time? But what they don't understand is that there's also a kid in rural Kentucky or Utah who is scared to talk to their friends about any religious questions they have for fear that they could be kicked out of their house, for fear that they could be abused. They're trans or gay or atheist, and they're trying to find their identity. And it is literally a life or death conversation for some of them. And this gets even more amplified if we head to some other countries around the world where apostasy is punishable by death, or people are imprisoned for years on end without trial just for making what would be a passive atheist comment here in the United States. So I think that's another way to think about how to be relevant to your community. We in Los Angeles are finding that we're getting people who are coming out of Jehovah's Witness background and trauma from Catholic and Mormon backgrounds, and they're having very different needs than people who are kind of like me. They grew up mostly atheists. They never really struggled with religion. I have a little bit more baggage than the kids coming out of UC Berkeley today, but there's different needs and possibly different language and different rituals and maybe even different identities under this larger atheist umbrella we're going to have to address. But your more specific question was about what can you access now, and what can you learn online? There are tons of resources online. Atheists United has moved 95% of our programs online during the pandemic. And while we, for a few months, tried to look at ways to go back in person, we've pretty much wound up back online. We're probably going to be that way until early next year, if I had to guess. And so you're welcome to join any of our programs that are meeting online right now. But honestly, I'd encourage you to just keep looking. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of atheist, humanist, skeptic, secular communities around the United States. And they have a variety of programs. There are groups in Utah, maybe not close to you. Usually they're a little bit more city-centric. And I really hope you keep looking. We don't have a ton of educational resources right now. We have much more community-focused resources, but there are other organizations that are more educational focused. And I can, if you email me, I'll put my email in the chat. I can try to find some for you later.
Okay, and then on a different topic, Lynn Nishihara has a question about political candidates. She says, given that there are multiple approaches, are there atheist political candidates we can consider?
Yeah, you want to check out an organization called Free Thought Equality PAC. They keep the best list of secular candidates running for office in the country right now. They're not all atheist or agnostic or humanist, but they've all made a commitment to the values and issues identified by a PAC run by atheists and humanists. So again, that's Free Thought Equality PAC. Christine or others, I'm sure we'll put a link in the chat. Yeah, really cool organization. It's so amazing how in 2014, when I moved to Arizona, we could not find anyone else in the country that was running as an open atheist for office. It was so earth-shattering what we were doing. And in just 6 years, 8 years, here we are now, where there's hundreds, if not thousands, of openly atheist and humanist candidates running across the country. And it's kind of being proven to be a non-issue, especially in the Democratic Party. There's tons of resources out there. I hope you find and support some candidates, and even better, I think you should run. I don't know if you've seen some of the tweets coming out of the religious right leadership these days, but those people, I'm surprised, can count to 3, and they are representing the country in the Senate, in our governorships, in your state legislatures, and I guarantee you would do better than them, and you should run for office.
I totally concur. I think we should have all of our friends, encourage all our friends to run for office, which leads me to Arlene and Louis put a reminder in the chat about this upcoming California Free Thought Day, which does include a day of activism. That's going to be October 9th, 10th, and 11th. It's all online. So.
I just got a private comment. I won't say who from, but they actually mentioned one of the reasons they stopped coming to meetings in the past was how long they were. We started to go way over an hour, and it didn't fit with their needs and wants for the community. And those are the types of things you have to be thinking about to stay relevant and address and stay present, address the needs and stay present with your community. I don't think the leaders of the organization in 2017 and 2018 had any sense that the first 40 minutes was too dry for most people in the audience, and people weren't coming back because of that. I was an outsider when I came in. That was one of the first things we tried to like shrink down. It was like 15 minutes or less for like kicking off the meetings. So you'll notice our online meetings, we try to get started as quickly as possible and we try to hop right into the meetings. But this is still a common problem. I've heard feedback because I go out and ask for it, but there's lots of humanist groups I work with who still have like 40-minute intros to their meetings and they don't really say anything. There's so much work that can be done if we're communicating more and meeting the needs. And I think we're sometimes just prioritizing the few people that are the loudest, and we're missing all the people that stop coming, that would be active participants if we just went out of our way to listen to them more.
Okay, and kind of want to wrap it up a little bit, but we have a couple more questions or one more. From Don Welty, is there a number of people that can call? A number of people can call to get more information about their doubts, a number like suicide prevention to discuss their thoughts and problems. I'm not sure exactly,
Yes.
But it sounds like Recovering from Religion.
Yeah, Recovering from Religion created a hotline. A few years ago, they created an online chat feature and a phone number where you can call in 24/7 and get somebody to talk to. This is a really, really wonderful program. I really hope you share with other people that might be interested in this. They get a lot of people, especially around the world, who have no one else to talk to about this. An offshoot from that project wound up being the Secular Therapy Project, because they found out that people, especially in rural parts of the country, have issues that sometimes relate to religion. And often the therapist is like, you should go to church. What? So they created a Secular Therapy Project where they now track and train secular therapists across the country and help you connect with them, which is a really wonderful resource. So I'll put a link to Recovering from Religion in the chat.
Okay, and I think that we might want to wrap it up. I've got a note here from Mark to remind members to please stay for the election portion of the meeting. Unless you have something else that you want to or close with, Evan.
No, I just want to say I appreciate you all. I really, really, really hope for those of you that are members, you can help me in communicating that Atheists United is not the same nonprofit that it was in 2018. Like, we should literally talk about it as almost two different organizations. They are the same name, they have the same values and mission, but we are a massive nonprofit organization that is on the scale of probably top 3 local organizations in the country for humanist and atheist community building. And we can't fund it the way we used to, and we can't communicate the way we used to. So if you can up your support, if you can up your monthly donation, if you can add us to your will, that's how we're gonna keep growing.